Okay, good afternoon everyone and welcome to this lesson here. We are busy with Natural Sciences for grade 7. I am your presenter, Mr. Paul de Klerk, and there is my email address. If you have any questions that you would like to ask me, you can send it through to that email address. So if we didn't cover something in this lesson that you would like to know more about, feel free to send me an email. As well as the homework, if you guys are answering the homework questions, you can send those answers to me as well, and I will have a look at that. Now, I have some news for you. Today will be my last day teaching the Natural Sciences class for grade 7. I am going to continue with coding for grade 7 and coding for the grade 4s. We have a new teacher coming in from tomorrow. He's extremely excited to be here, and he will take over this class from me from tomorrow. I've already sent him through all of the information that he needs and some of the slideshows that we've used, so I hope that you guys will enjoy him a lot. But you will still see me for those of you that are in the coding class, and for those that aren't, you're welcome to join us. It's not too late. We can get you caught up very quickly. Okay, it's a lot of fun there. Right, so back to this lesson and what we'll be chatting about today. Okay, so let us move straight into the revision from yesterday's homework. So I'm going to ask you to again keep the chats clear. For those of you that came in late, we have all now had a chance to say hello. I see we had a new couple of people join us. So we've all had our chance to say hello. From now on, let's try to keep the chat so that we can have some question and answers going. I am going to ask a bit of questions today, so I need you to have the ability to communicate with me. So the first one there, what are the different ways that pollination of flowers can take place? In the chat box, quickly write there for me. You don't need to write a full sentence. If you can just give me the 3 ways or the 3 things that I said helps pollination happen. We spoke about that briefly yesterday. Let's see. Yes, wind is definitely one of them. Water. Fertilization happens after pollination. So we need to have something that happens before fertilization can happen. There we go. Wind, water, and animals. Great. That's it for that question. Let me show you the answer that I have here. So obviously, if you are going to write a test, you don't want to just write wind, water, animal. That's not going to be accepted. So a sentence structured like this one: by means of animals acting as pollinators, as well as with the help of wind and water. That is going to be the answer that you will write on your test. Okay, so I know for this purposes we are using a chat box, and we are going to only write short, quick, to the point answers to make sure that everyone gets a chance to participate. But in your test, please do not do that and then tell your teacher, oh, but my teacher on the internet told me to do it this way. Okay, that's not the correct way. Use complete and well-structured sentences. Okay, so the next one, name 3 ways in which plants have adapted in order to attract pollinators. And go in the chat box. I see somebody has it in there already. Anyone else wants to give a hand and try out your hand at an answer there? Okay. Yes, good. You are all on the right track. So I just want to add something to the first one that I have there. It says sweetness, bright colors, and smell. Now it's important to remember that the sweetness comes from the nectar. Okay. So colorful petals, sweet smelling and sweet tasting nectar. So the nectar is the part of the plant, or what is produced by the plant, that creates that smell and the taste. Okay, and remember we said that the nectar is actually only produced as a reward system for pollinators so that they can get food from the plants, and the plants don't actually use the nectar for anything else other than that. Well, they don't need it. Okay, let's move on. Why do flowers that rely on wind and water to pollinate produce so much pollen? So we gave 3 reasons yesterday. You can sum it up in one sentence, but let me see. What do you remember from that? Why do flowers that rely on wind and water to pollinate produce so much pollen? Let's see. Anyone have any guesses? You do not have to give me all the reasons. Just one of the reasons will be good. I just want to see if we are on the right track. Okay? No, cross-pollination is not the reason for them to produce a lot of pollen. There is the first one. Good. You don't know where it is going to land. It's not going to be as direct as pollen stuck to a bee's body, and then the bee lands directly on the other flower, and it is going to be in a very close vicinity to the reproductive organ of that flower. Whereas if the wind blows it, it can end up anywhere. Right, if I can trust the name that I see on my screen, it's Jessie. Good job. Aha, there's another one from Amu. Great, Amu. They rely on chance because they don't know that the wind will blow. So when the wind does blow, they need to take the best advantage of that. Okay. Yes, very good. So here, let us go through the way that I've structured the sentence. They cannot predict which way the wind will blow. Okay, so it might be that if a flower is standing at the edge of a field of flowers and the wind is blowing in the opposite direction away from the field, that pollen is going to become wasted. It's not going to land on any species that is similar, so it can't pollinate. Okay, so they need to have extra pollen, so if the wind turns, there is pollen to help the pollination to happen. The next one is they have to rely on chance. Remember we said yesterday, if you look at the behavior of animals or insects and pollinators, they are going to have to eat often. Okay, so there might be a chance that there would be a bird or an insect coming by every day, taking pollen from one flower to the next. The wind, on the other hand, a strong wind might only come past every second week, or a light breeze might only happen once or twice in a week. So in other words, the flowers need to make sure that there is enough pollen that when the wind does blow, it is getting a good disbursement of this pollen. And then the last one, pollen gets received less directly when compared with how animals transfer pollen. So if you take the bee, for example, pollen sticks to their bodies, and when they move, the pollen, no problem if you're late, you're welcome. So when they move, the pollen sticks to their bodies and it stays on their bodies, and it only rubs off once they get into contact with the stigma, because remember we said that when the stigma is ready to receive pollen, it becomes sticky. So the stickiness on the stigma is what is taking the pollen off of the body of the pollinator. But if the wind blows, some of that pollen might end up on the grass, it might end up on the stem of the flower, it might end up on the leaves, and that is not the ideal place for pollination to happen. So yes, it is less direct when the wind is blowing it compared to when an animal is moving it from one plant to the next. Okay. Wow. Can fertilization happen if pollination does not occur? And I jumped the gun there and gave you the answer, so I'll just put it up there, and no. The answer is it cannot. Fertilization can only happen if pollination happens. Okay. Remember we spoke about that yesterday. If you go back and you look at the pistil and the parts of the pistil, pollen needs to land on the stigma, then it starts to grow. Pollen tubes down the stigma into the ovaries, and there in the ovaries, the pollen will fertilize the ovals, and that turns into seed. So if there is no pollen, then there can't be fertilization. Right, let's move straight into this one. This is an interesting topic, and this is going to be variation within a species. Okay, so variation is almost similar to differences. Okay, but there's something very important that we need to remember from this statement. This is talking about differences within a species. So differences between different species are more obvious. If you compare a hippo to a cat, you can obviously see the major differences there. Okay, but when you start to look at differences within a species, it becomes less obvious. So in animals and living organisms, it is easier to see, but when it comes to plants, variations within species are not as easy to spot. Okay, so the objective is going to be what variation means. So we already touched on that. It means the differences between some of the organisms in the same species. And then we want to know what causes variation. And we are going to have a look at that. And the word adaptation is going to come to mind there, as well as the way in which they reproduce. So we'll have a look at both of those in a minute. Okay, so the first thing that we need to remember, and this is a review that we did when we were speaking about the biosphere. So if you are new to this lesson, then we are doing review, or new to this class, we are doing review of term 1's natural sciences. So if you've seen this before, that's correct. You are supposed to see this. Okay, so the first one we have there, these are the classification systems, and this is the one that we are using now. Remember, we started with Aristotle's system. We realized that that isn't effective enough, so then we changed over to a system where we can compare the characteristics of living organisms. So let's see here. Life is the first one, then a domain, which is smaller, then it's grouped into smaller kingdoms, then grouped into phylum, which are smaller again than kingdoms, then into classes, then into orders, then into family, then into genus, and then into species. So what I want to know from you is, what is the smallest group of classification that we use? Species. Yes, very good. And we can see that as well there. Species is the smallest one. But if we say that species is the smallest one, just yes or no, can we divide species into different variations? So can we create groups under species that will have differences? Yes, yes, yes. Good. Yes, you are all right. Very well done. Okay, so let me start off by reading this to you. A species is a group of organisms that can inbreed with each other to produce fertile offspring. In this section, you will learn why the ability to create a fertile offspring is the single most defining characteristic of a species. So wherever organisms in a species live, they need to survive in those conditions. We say that they are adapted to their environment. So there are two parts to this slide that we need to know about. So the first one is that species, they can, if it is two different variations of the same species, they can reproduce, okay? And that is what the characteristic of a species is. The single most defining characteristic is that they can reproduce if they are of the same species. But if they are of different species, we are so designed that we cannot then reproduce, okay? And then the next one is the adaptations that we spoke about, and we'll look at that. Okay, so those individuals of a species which have characteristics that make them more successful at surviving will reproduce more and pass their characteristics to their offspring. Okay, so that is tying into the previous sentence that we said. Wherever organisms in a species live, they need to survive. So the individuals of a species that have the characteristics that make them more successful at surviving, they will reproduce more, obviously, because they will survive more. Okay. So, and they will pass those characteristics to their offspring. So, however, environments change over periods of time. This means that the species needs to constantly change over time to better survive in the conditions of their changing habitat. If the organisms do not adapt to their environment, they may not survive and the species will die out. Okay, remember we said life processes. I know we're touching on that again, but everything stems from that. One of the 7 life processes is reproduction. So here we can see that in order for successful reproduction to happen, a species needs to also adapt to its changing environment. If it does not adapt, it will not be able to survive because it won't necessarily be able to keep reproducing. Okay, so the world of the dog, and I see there was a comment there about dogs. So let's have a look. Small, big, long-haired, short-haired, black, white, brown, or spotty. What kingdom of organisms do dogs belong to? Okay, let's see. Do you guys remember? What kingdom of organisms do dogs belong to? Dogs belong to. So I'll give you a tip. Yes, great job. Animals. Awesome. Okay, they all belong to the animal kingdom. So now, this is a bit more tricky. What phylum do dogs belong to? and give a reason for your answer. So we learned this when we were looking at vertebrates and invertebrates, and we said that all vertebrates fall under this phylum. So what was the name of that phylum? It was a difficult name. Anyone want to guess? Okay, you guys are close, but mammal is actually the next classification. Before we get into mammals, there is one more that we need to check, and the phylum is going to be, dogs are from the phylum Chordata, as they are vertebrates having a backbone and an internal body skeleton, bony skeleton. Okay. So there we can see the phylum is Chordata. The next one, what class do dogs belong to? And that is mammals. And we have to give a reason for our answer. So we can say that dogs are mammals because they are endothermic, meaning they are warm-blooded, and they have fur, they have mammary glands, and they give birth to live young. Okay, so I just want to go back one so that you can see. Remember, I'm going to go back a couple. Give me a second. There we have kingdom at the top, then phylum, then class. Okay, so each time we are grouping and classifying things in smaller groups. So we're going from here, the kingdom, which is animals, right at the top, to the phylum, which is Chordata, and then to class. Okay, yes, I know when I hit the button on my keyboard, it will break a bit, so I'll try not to speak and touch the keyboard at the same time. Okay, good. Right, so look at the dogs in the above picture and write down some common characteristics of the animals. So, what characteristics can you see which are similar between all these dogs on the picture? In the chat box, go. Give me some characteristics. Fangs, yes. They have fur. Okay, 4 legs, they have paws, great. So let's do this. 4 legs, a tail, a snout, sharp teeth or the fangs, fur, and paws. These are not the only characteristics, okay? These are just some examples of the characteristics that are similar. Now, do you think these dogs are part of the same species? Yes or no? Aha. There's one right answer in all of them. They are a part of the same species. All dogs are part of the same species, but they all look different because they are different varieties. So let's go back. There you can see they all looking different because they are a different variety, and that variety comes from the fact that they have 2 parents. Okay, and we'll have a look at that. So there, yes, they are. All the different types of domestic dogs can reproduce with each other to create offspring. Okay. Alright, good job for those that were first and second, but you don't need to brag about it. Okay, so we can see here, all the different types of domestic dogs can reproduce with each other to create offspring. So what that means is that even the largest dog and the smallest dog could, scientifically speaking, create offspring together. Practically, it's not going to happen because of the size difference, but scientifically, technically speaking, it should be able to happen. So the ability to reproduce and have fertile offspring is the definition of a species. Okay, so now we're going to go into the next question. Although these dogs share many characteristics, there are many differences between them. What are some of those differences? So I'm just going to show this to you because I don't want to run out of time today. So some differences include fur color, fur length, body shape, body size, the length of the legs, the length of the tails, the length of the snout, shape of the ears. Okay, and also some differences would be personality. If I compare my dog to our neighbor's dog, their personalities differ completely. Okay, so there are some differences there in the same species, but there are different varieties. Okay, so let's move on. All living organisms that reproduce sexually produce offspring that are different from the parent organisms. Now, this is important that we need to remember this here. Okay, offspring that reproduce sexually, they have different. The offspring will be different from the parents. Why? If we have a look at how that happens, is because we have male cells and female cells that fuse together. So the offspring will have traits from both parents. But if you look at something that reproduces asexually, then it is going to be almost an identical copy. The offspring will be almost identical to the parent because there is only one set of cells, DNA structure, that is creating the new organism. Okay, but if they are reproducing sexually, that means there are male cells and female cells, male DNA and female DNA, and those fuse or join together. Okay, so this allows the new organisms to be different to other organisms within the same species. So we can have the same species, okay, but the organisms in the species can be different because they are reproducing sexually. They have two different parents. Okay, so it's the same species. It doesn't change the species, it only changes the variation within the species. So we call this difference variation. As we saw in the last activity, all dogs on earth are actually the same species, but there are huge differences between all the individuals. We say there is variation. Right. So even animals from the same litter or children from the same parents have differences. Take a look at the kittens in the box below. They are all from the same litter, so they share the same parents, but they all look different. So there are 3 kittens from the same litter, but they all look different. And the same happens with humans. I have 3 brothers. I am one of 4 brothers, and we are all different. Different sizes, different shapes. We have different personalities, but we have the same parents. Okay. Okay, someone is asking why is that? I'm going to go back to this one here, and this is our answer. All living organisms that reproduce sexually. So that reproduce sexually means that it is taking the cells from the mom and the dad and putting it together to create a new organism. Okay, if something reproduces asexually, there is only one set of cells that is coming in. Okay, but because these are reproducing sexually, it means that there are male cells and female cells present, and that means that every single new organism is going to be different, because sometimes there might be some more traits from one and less traits from the other, and it might be the other way around. Okay, Devang, I hope that answers your question. Okay, South Africa is an amazing example of diversity amongst our people. Okay, so this is where it becomes really obvious. Just have a look at your class and how much variation there is between all of you in one class. Some learners may be tall and others may be shorter. Some have dark hair and some have blonde hair or brown hair. And there is a range of skin colors in South Africa. Since we are all from the same species, this is another example of variation. Okay, so we can see that we are all the same species. We are all Homo sapiens, but we differ quite a lot. Now, I told you before that I used to live overseas, and there I worked with people from at least 10 different countries. And I can promise you it's not only in South Africa that there are different people. There are many different people from all over the world, but we are all still the same species. Doesn't matter where we come from, because we are all Homo sapiens. Right. So we say that certain traits are passed down from generation to generation over many years, from parent organisms to their offspring. And this is called inheritance. There are some traits which are very easy to see how they are inherited, such as skin color or height. Okay? So if we have a look at some of the character traits, I have a tall dad and I am a relatively tall person. Right? My son as well, he's also tall for his age. That's one of the traits that we can easily see that has been inherited in my family. So here is something. Did you know that some people are able to wink with one eye, but not with both? Okay? Or that others can see some colors, but not all the colors. This is called color blindness. So all of this means that there is variation within a species. Okay? And there we can see a photo of somebody that has a bit of trouble seeing colors, and that is something that you are getting from your parents. It is inherited. Okay, here's a fun fact. Did you know that the ability to roll your tongue is an inheritance? Okay, so if you look at that photo, all those kids are rolling their tongues. Can you roll your tongue? In the chat there, tell me. Okay, many of you are saying yes. Many are saying I can. Some saying no. Some saying maybe. Okay. So before I ask my next question, put your tongue back in your mouths, please. Luckily the camera isn't on, so I don't have to see that, as everyone's trying to do this. Okay, my next question is, if you and one of your classmates can both roll your tongues, does that make you all family? Yes or no? So I had many of you in this class saying that you can. Correct. That does not make you family. Okay. It just means, sorry, let me go back. It just means that your families have coincidentally the same traits that they can send off. Yes, there's a good answer from Lefa. No, we don't have the same, we don't share parents, so that means that we are not family, but we are all from the same species. And I showed you this as an example that even within, as we take a look at variations, we looked at the dogs and we said that some traits or some characteristics of the dogs are similar. They all have 4 legs, they all have this and they all have that. So the same thing happens in any variation of any species. Some of the variations will be similar, and there might be even smaller groups of variations where if you take, for example, 10 people, 5 people will have a variation that is similar to one another, but it's different from the other 5. Okay, so let's move on. Now, this is where we are going to start looking at that word that I had in the beginning. Adaptations. Okay, before we carry on, there was actually a very good point there made from Jesse. Some traits are lost, and after we've done this section of natural selection, you will understand why. Because we read in the beginning that living organisms and animals and plants, the environment and the habitat in which they find themselves changes. So they, over time, start adapting, and that might mean that they lose some traits that are not useful for the species anymore, and they get some new traits that might be useful for the species in the changing environment and the habitat. So that's a very good observation, Jesse. Well done. Okay, let's move on. How does variation in a species help it to survive? Have you ever heard the saying survival of the fittest or survival of the strongest? Have you guys heard that saying before, where someone would say that? Yes, most of us have, okay? So this refers to the way in which the organisms are able to survive in their environments because they have adapted the best, or they have certain characteristics which allow them to survive better than others. So there might be a group of 100 of the same species, of which 50 of them have adapted to their environment better than the other 50. So the fitter ones, the ones that have adapted better, they are seen as being fitter or stronger, and they will survive more easily and more successfully than the others. Okay. So survival refers to the characteristics that allow the members of a species to thrive and reproduce successfully. So their advantageous characteristics are passed on successfully. Thus, over generations, the entire species can survive as the majority of its members happen to have inherited the advantageous characteristics. Okay, so I'm going to... Right, yes guys, I'm going to put this there. Right. I'm going to read that last statement one more time because it is important for us to know before we can move on to what is coming next. Survival refers to the characteristics that allow the members of a species to thrive and reproduce successfully. So if we go back to the example, and I'm going to show you one here that's coming up next, but I want to explain it before we look at it practically. If we have a group of, let's make our own example here. Let's say we have a group of 50 dogs and we let these dogs go out in the wild, right? And 25 of these dogs have the ability to find food for themselves, okay? They have the ability to find a place to sleep and they have the ability to find water. But the 25 others, they do not have that ability because they rely on people. They have always relied on people, so they have lost that trait. They don't have that trait anymore. So the ones that can find food and find a place to rest and find water, they are obviously going to survive. They will not die of hunger, they will not die of exhaustion, and they will not die of thirst. Okay? The other 25, they will not be able to survive. So the ones that are going to survive are obviously going to be the ones that will reproduce. The ones that will not survive will not be able to reproduce because they won't survive. And what happens is those that are able to survive and that have the traits that can help them survive, when they reproduce, they are actually going to be passing on that trait to their offspring or those traits. So what happens is, as a species, they become stronger and stronger and stronger because they are passing on those traits, and maybe some new traits develop in newer generations as they start adapting more to the environment that they are in. Okay, so let's have a look at an example. Imagine some impala in one group in a game reserve started to develop a characteristic which was passed down from the parents to the offspring, allowing them to run faster for longer. Okay, and there's an example of an impala, and there's me cheering it on. Run, impala, run. Okay, now you can see from this photo, if we were to look for fast impalas, this would be one. Okay, he is moving at quite a speed. So if there is a group of impalas that is being hunted by a lion or a cheetah, obviously the faster ones will get away more easily. So let's move on. The impala in this group can then run faster than the impala in another group. So over time, the faster impala will be able to escape the predators such as cheetahs and lions more often, and so they will live long enough to reproduce and raise their offspring successfully. They will therefore pass on the swift running characteristic. The slower impala will get caught more often, and so they will not survive to produce offspring. The slower impala are slowly removed over time. The characteristics making some of the impala faster allows those impala to survive and pass this trait on to their offspring. This is the principle of natural selection. Now, something that I want you to take note of, and it was mentioned first, that some traits go lost. If the slower impala are dying out, the traits that are making them to be slower than the other group will also die out. Those traits will not reproduce. Only the traits from the ones that survive will reproduce. So that makes sense, right? Do you guys understand that idea? So it's not only the group that goes missing, but it is the trait that they have and that they can pass on that will also go missing. Do you understand it like that? Yes or no? Anyone want me to run? Okay, good. There's a lot of yeses coming through. Okay. Right. Great, great, great. Let's see what we have next. Oh, we're actually at the end of this lesson. So what I want to do today, because it's our last one, I want to work through these questions with you. Okay, and I want to go back to the slides so that we can see where we find the answers. So the first one is saying, yes, no, I know it's a bit early. I want to take some time to chat to you guys about these questions today because it's my last lesson with you. Okay, what would happen if the organisms in a species do not adapt to their environment? Okay, so go in the chat box, answer that question for me. Okay, a lot of you are saying they will die. Okay, there's something that I want you to see here. I just need to find exactly. Where's that sentence? Because there is a specific wording that they use in the scientific papers. Okay. I can't remember that now, so I'm just going to say it to you. I can't remember where it is. Let me just read over. May summer faster snow will survive and pass straight to their offspring. Okay, so here we can see the slower impala are slowly removed over time. So, what would happen if the organisms in a species do not adapt to their environment? So yes, you are right, the living ones will die. But there's something else that is going to happen. And that is going to be that the species as a whole is going to die out. Okay, so when we are speaking about the individual animals and we compare back to this, they will become extinct. Great. Yes, very good. That's what I was getting at. I wanted you guys to find that word of extinct. Okay, so if we go back to this one, we can see that over time the faster impala will be able to escape. So what I want you to understand is, if some impala have the characteristic trait of running faster and longer, just because they can run faster and longer does not mean that all the other ones that are slower will immediately die. It's not like they're just going to fall over and not live anymore. This is a process that takes time. This is something that happens, and the reason it happens is because the trait is not being passed on to new organisms that are being produced within the species. Okay, so that is exactly what we say, they will go extinct. Okay, but sometimes, this is another question that I had in mind. Is it only the fact that a species does not adapt that will make it go extinct, or can there be other factors that will make a species go extinct? Okay, some of you are saying yes, some of you are saying no. Okay, so let's think back quickly. Okay, it's not on this slide, so you can just look at this picture, but listen carefully. Remember, we read that article about the bees yesterday. Okay, and I said that that is a fake article. It is something that somebody thought up to prove a point. So in that article, the people hypothesized that in the future, perhaps some of these insects will become extinct, not because they cannot adapt, but they will become extinct because we are polluting the air and they cannot fly. Their wings are being negatively affected by the air and acid rain. So in other words, they are going to die out and they will become extinct, but it is not their fault. It is not the fault of the species that is not adapting. That is happening because of an external factor. And the external factor is we are not conscious about conservation. The knock-on effect of that is, if the bees and the pollinators die out, they become extinct. Pollination does not happen. If pollination cannot happen, the food that the antelope or the impala eats doesn't produce anymore. It doesn't get produced anymore because there's no pollination happening. If they don't have food, then we don't have food, because not all of us are vegetarians. Some of us are omnivores. So like me, I like a good braai. So what that would mean is, It can happen if we are all, yes, all life dies. Let me just get to that last question so that we can stay on topic. So here it says, what would happen if the organisms in a species do not adapt to their environment? We said that they will die out or they will become extinct. Okay? But I am telling you now that that die out or that extinction can also happen not just because the animals didn't adapt to their environment or the species didn't adapt. It can also happen because of an outside factor that is creating a problem for them and that is destroying their habitat. Okay, so let's go back to the second question. What phylum do dogs belong to? Give a reason for your answer. It was that difficult name that we had in the beginning. Who can remember that? Chordata. Okay, I'm going to put the right spelling for you guys in there. Oh no, I just sent it to only one person. Sorry, let me try that again. Oops. So if you check the... Oh, come on. Yes, there we go. That was the correct spelling. Chordata. Chordata. Or chordata, however you pronounce it. Okay. So that is the phylum that dogs belong to. And the reason for that is because they are vertebrates. Okay. So you all remember what the definition of a vertebrate is. Something that has a backbone. So they are all under that same phylum. Okay. Next question. What is the definition of a species? How do we know, or what is not the only definition, what's the most important definition or the defining characteristic of a species? It's okay if you are late, you can catch the recording on YouTube. Someone says a group of something. Give me a second while I jump back to that slide. Oh, I just need to get onto that. Where's this point? There in the yellow. The ability to reproduce and have fertile offspring is the definition of a species. Okay. So can you guys all see that there? So the question said, what is the definition of a species? Yes, it's true. The recording is on YouTube. The question says, what is the definition of a species? And I'm telling you the answer is the ability to reproduce and have fertile offspring. That is the definition of a species. Okay. Because species cannot reproduce between other species. They can only reproduce within their own species. So that is how we define a species. Okay. What allows the new organisms to be different to other organisms within the same species? So I had this question earlier when we spoke about the dogs. Okay? Why are dogs all the same species, but they look different? There are so many different variations of dogs. Why is that? Because why, Tiana? Yes, those are why, or the differences. Okay, I'm going to go back to that slide that has that answer. Sorry, let me just find it quickly. No. Here we go. Because they can have the same parents but different body shape. There, that's very close to the right answer. There, right at the top. We only have 2 minutes left, so I'm quickly going to read that to you and then say goodbye. All living organisms that reproduce sexually. So it's the way in which they reproduce that is causing that last thing. What allows the new organisms to be different to other organisms within the same species is because they reproduce sexually, meaning there are male cells and female cells that fuse or join together to create the new offspring. Okay guys, that was it from me for today during your natural science lesson, grade 7. Thank you so much. It was so much fun being here with you guys. And then you will see a new teacher from tomorrow. And those of you that want to, you are welcome to join us in the coding lesson for grade 7, which is at 2 o'clock every day. Have a great day and goodbye.